Starting in August 2026, the LSAT is moving back toward in-person testing for almost everybody. Remote in-home testing will largely disappear, with limited exceptions for certain medical accommodations or extreme hardship. And this shift comes after organized cheating operations, including proxy test takers and real-time theft of unreleased exam content, led LSAC to suspend online testing in mainland China beginning with the January 2026 administration. And this is from LSAC's own announcement. And so today, I'm going to break down what changed, why it changed, and what it actually means for you if you're taking the LSAT in August 2026 and beyond. On February 11th, LSAC published a statement titled Evolving How We Deliver the LSAT to Increase Test Security and Test Taker Success. And they made two things very clear. First, they are not changing the content, the structure, or the format of the LSAT. And second, beginning with the August 2026 administration, they are moving toward in-center testing for almost all US and international test takers. Here is their exact language, and I quote, "Moving toward in-center testing will provide another important deterrent to anyone who tries to undermine the integrity of the test." And so what this means is beginning in August, they're moving back toward in-center testing for nearly everybody following the organized efforts to capture unreleased LSAT content during remote administrations. And by returning to a controlled in-person testing center environment, they are looking to reduce the structural vulnerabilities that made large-scale cheating possible in the first place. They will maintain remote testing only in limited cases for those with certain medical accommodations or extreme hardship. In short, they're choosing to maintain long-term credibility over convenience to strengthen the value of legitimately earned scores. Now let's talk about what triggered this in the first place. LSAC confirmed once again that they suspended online testing in mainland China because of what they described as organized efforts to promote test misconduct. And these efforts include proxy test taking, where somebody else would log in under a different test taker's identity, and real-time theft of unreleased LSAT exam content. Because the thing is, and most people don't know this, most LSAT exams are not publicly released. LSAC reuses sections. And so if unreleased content is captured and circulated privately, it's not just affecting that one test date. It's also affecting future administrations, creating long-term structural risk. Because once that unreleased material starts circulating, law schools then start asking a bigger question. Can they trust these scores? And the LSAT only works if law schools trust the validity of those exams. And of course, remote testing was essential during the pandemic. It allowed them to continue giving the LSAT when testing centers were closed. But remote testing creates thousands of different unique environments, different computers, different networks, different physical spaces, whereas in contrast, in-center testing standardizes the environment. Everyone's using the same type of equipment. Everyone's taking it in a controlled space with direct human oversight in person. And LSAC also acknowledged another important data point in their announcement. They said, and I quote, "While remote test takers account for only about 40% of all test takers, they account for the majority of score holds." In other words, remote test takers disproportionately are more likely to have their scores held, which delays results. And that triggers manual reviews, creating more uncertainty and delays in the law school admissions cycle. And LSAC also noted in their announcement that while only a small percentage of test takers experience serious issues, most incomplete tests and technical failures happen remotely. And so by moving back to in-person, which I've been pushing for months now, they are reducing instability and disruption for the test takers. They're making things more secure, making them more reliable. But a lot is not changing, and this is important. LSAC emphasized that what never changes is the underlying skills that are at the heart of the LSAT and the LSAT's unmatched predictive validity and reliability. So we've still got logical reasoning, we still got reading comp. The core structure of the LSAT still remains. The content isn't changing, the difficulty isn't changing, it's just a change in the delivery of the exam. Now, along with the change back to in-person, they're also announcing a new test delivery platform within LawHub. They're changing the user interface to make it more secure, more robust, less vulnerable to cheating. Not a major change, but significant enough that they're announcing it several months in advance. And so they're going to give test takers a new interactive model of the new interface by the end of March. They're going to give you updated practice tests in the new interface by May, and they're describing these as minor, but minor differences matter when you're looking for a top score. If you're more comfortable with the format, it's going to reduce your hesitation. It's going to reduce any loss in points you could have, because even just 1 or 2 points at the top of the scale can significantly change your admissions and your scholarship outcomes. And so if you're taking the LSAT in August or beyond, you do want to practice in the updated new interface in LawHub once it's available. We don't want you to be surprised by the software on test day. And remember that despite all the changes, the LSAT still is the dominant admissions metric. The rankings rely on the LSAT medians. Your scholarships rely on your score. And admissions uses the LSAT to compare applicants across different undergraduate institutions and different grading systems. And so they want to reduce any loss in confidence for the LSAT. In other words, if law schools are less confident in the LSAT, the entire admissions ecosystem gets destabilized. And so LSAC's decision to go back to in-person to beef up the testing interface, that signals something important here. They're saying that they want to make sure the LSAT maintains its credibility long-term to protect the value of high scores. And there is another question that serious test takers are quietly asking. Will this reduce score inflation? Because over the past several years, we've seen a noticeable increase in 170 plus scores. And some of that is, of course, completely legitimate. There's more access to high quality prep, more retakes, better analytics, more competitive applicant pools. But when LSAC publicly acknowledges organized misconduct involving proxy test takers and the theft of unreleased exam content, it raises a fair structural question. Did that misconduct have a measurable impact at the very top of the score distribution? Because even if a small percentage of artificially elevated scores existed in the 170s, tightening security and returning to controlled in-person environments could slightly compress the high end of the curve. Doesn't mean high scores disappear, and it certainly doesn't mean that most high scores weren't legitimate, but admissions is often decided at the margins. If the 172s become slightly less saturated, if the 175 plus range becomes a bit rarer, then truly earned top scores carry even more signaling power. In other words, stronger test security by returning to in-person can help to reduce artificial inflation and restore sharper differentiation among elite scorers. And that's not guaranteed, but it is a plausible downstream effect of moving back toward in-person testing. And it's something that serious applicants should be thinking about. So going forward, if you're taking the LSAT in August or beyond, assume that you are going to take it in person and train that way. Practice in the same desk you'll take it on test day. Limit any environmental variability. In other words, simulate what test day is going to be like. Build your endurance in controlled test day-like conditions. And secondly, stay focused on the skills the LSAT's testing, because nothing about the intellectual demands of the LSAT has changed. It still rewards your ability to analyze arguments, conditional reasoning, comparative reading, precision under time pressure. All of that remains the same. You also want to familiarize yourself with the new LawHub interface as soon as it becomes available. End of March, where you can simulate it. End of May, when the practice tests are on there. And control what you can control. Now, some students will hear this announcement and think that there's something majorly wrong with the LSAT. But in fact, it's the opposite. This is LSAC adapting to the fact that something was wrong, like the cheating, for example, and they are fixing it. They are surviving. They're maintaining the validity of the LSAT and ensuring its survival by protecting the credibility. Because when there's a trade-off or a debate, tug of war between access and integrity, LSAC chose integrity. They're making it a bit less convenient, of course. There were benefits to taking it remotely. But given that any online test can be hacked, going for in-person, I think, was the smart move. And so if you're serious about law school, if you want law schools to trust in your 170 plus score being earned validly, you want validity. You don't want your score to be under suspicion. You want it to mean something. And so the LSAT is not collapsing. They're actually reinforcing its foundation. And so the students who will succeed in this environment are the ones who can sit down in a controlled room under strict conditions and calmly dismantle arguments for 3 hours straight. That skill still matters and it's not going anywhere.